Think of all the places that you might meet God or might hear from God. One of the places I never thought I'd hear from God was at the DMV, Division of Motor Vehicles, the License Bureau, the BMV in some states, the place that you have to do all that messy stuff that takes infinitely longer than you hoped it would. Well, I was moving my daughter at the end of June into a new city, a new state, and we had to go to the DMV. I was dreading it. I knew it was going to take forever. I knew it was going to be painful. And we were moving to Chicago, so that meant she had to go to Illinois. Now, that's actually where I got my first license because we grew up in the Chicago area. She was moving because of a job. She got recruited out of Ohio State, got a great job, moved to Chicago suburbs. And to do so, we had to switch the title of the car into that state's title registration. We had to get a new license for her, and she actually had to do the test electronically, which she got really nervous for some reason. She's been driving 6 years. If you can't tell the right answers, you shouldn't be behind the wheel, frankly. So she crushed that, and we had to get the license plates and tags and everything. It was an enormous adventure. The last thing I thought I'd hear was a message from God. But on the way to the DMV, God spoke to me. You see, I was dropping her off, and there was something of a closing chapter, and there was something that God was saying to me about investing and kind of summarizing and blessing her in a way that she felt appropriately sent off. And sure, we were going to pray. My wife and I were going to pray over her, and we were going to have some celebration kind of dinners and things like that after we were moving her in and all. But there was something I felt like I needed to give to her. And so 22 years wasn't enough. This night meant something, and I had to come up with some pearls that she was going to take and distill and try to incorporate. And so I thought, God, what are the things that I need to talk about with my daughter? What are the ones that I can help her learn for 10 cents on my dollar? The things that I had to pay $1 for that were expensive and were hurtful or were painful or just took a long time. Can I take those and distill them and give them to her for only 10 cents of her currency? And was she willing to receive those? And so those 3 things I want to share with you because I hope that if you know them, you'll be encouraged and reinforced that these 3 things really matter. And if you don't, that you can learn too, 10 cents on my dollar. And so for whatever reason, the thing that came crashing into my mind the most was that I wanted her to play offense. Number 1, play offense. It's something that I've learned throughout my life. Now, you hear in sports all the time that defense wins championships. Not in life. Playing a defensive life never wins life. It's offense that makes the new chapter. It's offense that builds the new skill. It's offense that makes your life rich with experience. And so I wanted my daughter to play offense in the worst way. You see, she'd been relatively shy, kind of an introvert, but she was burgeoning out to Chicago, and I knew that was going to be a terrific setting for her to take the next step in her adventure. So I said, Bethany, whatever you do, play offense. I want you to go for it. Lay it out there. Put your life out. Hold your hands open. Drink it in. Go for something, even if it doesn't work out. And this is actually true in sports especially. There was a study done by a couple of people who studied what happened when soccer players had to take a penalty kick. Now, a penalty kick is either to win the game or to tie the game. And so they separated what the attitude was going and what the results were. We found that the professional soccer players shooting a penalty kick to win would score 92% of the time. More than 9 out of 10 shots they scored. Whereas, while taking the shot to tie, it was converted only 62% of the time. Isn't that an incredible stat? They found the same thing with basketball. When you're playing to go ahead, when you're playing to win, there's a different attitude that comes in. I think it's a different spirit, a different approach to how you pursue things. Whereas if you're playing to tie so that you don't lose, we're less effective. Man, playing not to lose drives me out of my mind as a fan. When you play not to lose, you have a big lead, 14 points. You can tell there's a momentum in football that starts to shift on the field, and you're always worried that the other team's going to come up because you're not going for it. And what I wanted my daughter to do was to go for it. In Matthew 25, there's an incredible story. God talks to us about the servants and what he's given them while he was away and what their return was. And some of them got a terrific return. One of them hid the money and got the same, so he gave it back to him. And he said this to the people who returned and doubled their money. His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'm going to put you in charge of many. Come and share in your master's happiness." Man, the things that he's given us, I want us to take and to reproduce. I want us to bear fruit. Whatever it is that God gives me, I want to take boldly and take that road less traveled, that path in the fork that looks a little bit more dangerous. How do we build those skills, those muscles, those new things that get us to a new horizon? How do we even taste? I remember my kids were afraid to eat new foods when they were little. And I remember saying, but this strawberry is going to be terrific. Just take a chance. I promise you, you're going to love this. My son fought me. He said, no way, I am not going to eat that thing. And once he bit it, he couldn't stop. Strawberries became his favorite fruit. This was true in my life as well. I know that at each job I took, when I went for a bigger or a different or a new, somehow God showed up in a big way. I had the honor of starting a ministry that was aimed at pooling the different churches across the city to do big works. That if the ailments of our city are to ever be changed and grown, that it was going to be the church and it was going to be Jesus working through us that was going to get that kind of result. And so we started 9 different ministries. I was adding each year a different ministry, but the problem was I could never get enough funding. It seemed like no matter what I did, the funding was kept at $500,000. Well, if you try to do 9 ministries with $500,000, even though you're working with partners, you're going to eventually outpace the amount of work there is with the amount of money that you have to fund it. And so I basically ran those ministries into a place where we couldn't sustain them, so we had to give them away to other ministries. You know what the beauty is? 7 of those 9 ministries are still alive, and they're thriving. And they've resulted in separate 501c3s that are just prosperous beyond belief. The great news is it had nothing to do with me. My hands were open on these ministries. And if I wouldn't have taken the chances, if I wouldn't have gone after it, I wouldn't have made myself available to what God had planned. And the lives that are changed just because I played offense resulted in terrific things. The great news is I know I can't take credit for any of it because I've been out of that equation for a while. But man, what an honor it was to start those, to help with those things, and to see the fruit that's coming so many years later. So number 1, play offense. Number 2, this sounds a little funky on a Sunday morning at church. Poop stinks. Your poop stinks. And how you deal with that matters a lot. If you try taking yourself too seriously and you're just focused on everything tightly gripped that you have to win at, that you have to be good at, other people will notice. You'll start using yourself comparatively, either to the goals or to other people. And if you think that you're not worthy, if you're undeserving, it also reflects in how you behave. You're intimidated. You sit back. You miss what God is inviting you into. And so how we deal with the scent of our poop has a lot to do with what God's going to do with our lives. And if we can just deal with it, there's freedom waiting for us. It's an incredible thing. Everybody knows that we're weak at certain things. It's not like we can cover them up. So those of us who take it too seriously, those of us who are keeping track either with our checkbooks or the number of things that we've got toys-wise, or the number of hours or the vacations that we have or whatever it is, if those are the things that we're using as how good our life is doing, we're missing the metric that Jesus is inviting us to. And if we're sitting on the sidelines afraid and worried, we're missing the things that Jesus cares about. And so this very item, I wanted my daughter, who is a perfectionist, to be free and easy with her shortcomings, to not take herself too seriously, to embrace what's in front of her, whether she fails first time around or not. She was a student from the day she came out. The girl got 1B and 1B plus from kindergarten through all of college. She gripped so tightly. Performance, achievement was so important. It established a lot of her self-worth. Man, I just wanted her to have some fun. I wanted her to embrace what was ahead. And so dealing with the fact that we're not going to be perfect, that we're going to have other people do well around us, that we're going to fail, that we're going to have so many things happen that we're going to have as curveballs that we'll have to adjust to, was paramount to my parting words. If we take ourselves too seriously, we're like this story in Luke chapter 18. It's an amazing story about the comparison of two people. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee, that's a religious person, and the other was a tax collector. That's somebody who most of the community despised. They were usually selfish and they were thieving in a variety of ways, skimming off the top. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. Robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. He was comparing himself with this guy in the back. He said, I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I got. He was focused on his behavior, his achievement, his omission of doing big bad sins. And then there's this other contrast for the tax collector as he goes through it. And he says, instead, standing at a distance, he wouldn't even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. He understood that God was more worried about his heart than he was about his achievements. You see, when we get focused and we transfer the call of God into religion, we miss everything. It's our heart that matters the most. It's the way I think about other people. It's not necessarily the words that come out or even the tone that comes out of my voice. God cares about the heart, not about the behavior so much. Similarly, if we think we're always undeserving, we're like the kids who go to this incredible place where they're afraid to do anything over time. At first, everybody is wild. If you ask a kid to dance or sing or to play in some crazy way at the playground, they'll jump in immediately. No reservations. They'll be having a ball. You ask an adult to take a picture, and it's like extracting their wisdom teeth. Well, I don't have the right, I don't really want to, no, don't take a picture. And if you take a picture, let me see it. We're so worried that we don't come off well. We're so worried about the personas that we've crafted that might shed us in a poor light. This week we had something happen at work where we had to have a game that was interrupted across all 14 campuses, and I had to wear a mullet wig. My wife showed me the pictures of me with the mullet wig. It was among the most embarrassing things I've ever had. And I laughed my butt off because I know I look like a fool. Whatever it is, when we are afraid to be embarrassed, we're afraid to walk into shame, we miss the joy that God calls for. So recognize your poop stinks. There's an author who wrote a book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball, who was the creative at Hallmark greeting cards, and he used to go around and talk to kids about creativity because he felt like it was getting choked out of our society. And he went to the first group in the kindergarten, first grade, second grade area, and he said, how many of you are artists? Almost every hand came up. He went to 7th and 8th grade. How many of you in this room are artists? And they had maybe half say that they were artists. By the time he went to juniors and seniors in high school, he asked the same question. He had 2 hands. 1 or 2 hands in every class he spoke with. Something happens where we choke out the innate things that were given to us at birth because we're worried. We feel like we're undeserving. We can't color inside the lines. It might not look good. So recognize your poop stinks. The antidote is ironically generosity. the antidote for worrying about all this is generosity. It takes that focus away from us and puts it on other people. Giving actually releases the same chemicals as food and sex in the same area of our brain. Isn't that amazing? There's a release of chemicals that delight us when we're involved in an act of generosity or we actually give something away. Why were we made that way? That's an incredible invitation for us to pursue generosity to combat, of all things, how seriously we take ourselves, how tightly we grip on things. And so the third point that I wanted to make sure she got before we took off was that curiosity saved the cat. Some of us have heard the term, curiosity killed the cat, because the cat was getting into things that weren't its business. But I believe it's exactly the opposite, that curiosity is what saves us. Curiosity is the wonder about everything around us. It's the thing that helps us learn. It's the thing that gives us passion. It's the thing that makes us interested in other people. Not surprisingly, the word curious comes from the Latin root word of that's care, that means care, to care. We're transferring care when we're curious. Kids start out at 300 questions a day. Isn't that amazing? I know that I, as a parent, was like, enough of the why questions. Enough is enough. Why? But why do you do that? Why, Daddy, why are you doing? Those curious minds are thirsty for learning. They're thirsty about motivation. They're thirsty about learning the ways of the world. They're thirsty about being interested. They care about people. It's really an amazing gift. And somehow, again, we choke that out of us as well. And so I want to challenge all of us to be more curious. My wife and I are entering in a whole new season now as Bethany has graduated and gone off to Chicago. We aren't just empty nesters, we're total empty nesters. There's no child within 90 miles. And so all of a sudden, it's a very different atmosphere in our house. There's not even the threat of a surprise visit. It's really, really interesting. And so one of the things that I've been remarking about is I'm so much more interested in my wife. 30 years of marriage and, 13 or something like that beforehand. So 43 years of knowing this woman, I'm finding out that she's very different from what I've known all along. You see, none of us are static. The more we wonder about other people, the more interested, the more love that the care is actually going toward that person. So I want to wonder about my wife. I want to wonder about you. I want to know the things that matter to you. I want to ask questions that are really interesting so I get to hear the response, not just because I want to be nice, but because I really want to know the answer. We had the community pastors together a couple of Thursdays ago. It turned out I was kind of sick, so I couldn't go, but I wanted to ask some questions. So I gave them to Lori, and she brought them to the community pastor dinner. And the first one was, tell me the 2 compliments that meant the most to you during your life, and who gave it, and why was it so important? Why did it mean so much? Man, that's the stuff that's interesting. I want us to be that people who wonder about other people. And attached to that, it's wondering about God. How we're sitting here in this room, talking about things that matter, talking about purpose and play, talking about vulnerability. That's not just animal behavior. So 2 inanimate objects smashing into each other somewhere in outer space could not really cause what is happening today. The technology of a microphone and a video. The comfortable seats, because we know that when we're sitting and taking a load off, it's a lot easier to pay attention. The lighting. It's fascinating. When you look at nature, you can't help but run into God. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, there's a beautiful verse that talks about how God reveals himself through nature. For his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So no one has an excuse not to see him. When we wonder, we have the chance to see God. He reveals himself in nature. He reveals himself in curious questions. in our hunger to find out our purpose, in our delight to experience play. I want our community to be a community of wonder. I hope you do too. I want to wonder more about God. I want to wonder more about you. And so at the DMV, I somehow encountered God. As I was trying to give away some pearls to my daughter, I think God was speaking to me more. Mark, I want you to play offense. I want you to be aggressive and bold. Take more chances. Mark, your poop stinks. Don't take yourself too seriously. And Mark, continue to wonder more about me. So I have a gift for you today. If you are not, I'll invite the folks in the auditorium to come forward that have these. We're going to pass out some journals. It's a real simple version of a journal, though. I am not a journaler, but I want to give you something tangible that when you leave this room, you don't forget to do this. I want you this week to take 15 minutes, just 15 minutes, take this little composition notebook, unwrap it, take a pen, and I want you to unpack one of those three areas. What is it that God is pressing into for you? Which area do you need to explore a little bit more? Is it the one that's in the area of playing offense more? Is that something God's calling you to? Are you playing it too safe right now? Maybe it's how seriously you take life, that you're not enjoying enough, that you're trying to present an image, that you're trying to make achievement in bank accounts and businesses and jobs and careers and houses and vacations. Is God telling you to peel back from that? Or maybe it's God's telling you to dial in more with Him, to find out, to wonder more, to explore, to ask questions. Does He want you to pursue a relationship where you've been holding back? Is there some ability to transfer care through the curiosity toward that person? Whichever it is, I'd like you to write it down right now. Write down what the one area that you're supposed to unpack this week. And I want you to take this little composition book and just jot a couple notes down. This isn't some huge obligation. You don't have to put some huge scripture in there. You don't have to do some heavy analysis. You need to have fun and say, God, what do you want me to pay attention to? And how can I unpack that? Let's pray. Father, thank you for what you have given us. You've given us this invitation to be more than mechanical in our pursuits of life. And God, just like my daughter, I want to give away what you've been revealing to me, what I need to apply in my own life to my friends here. So Father, this week we commit to spending time and unpacking one of these areas and saying, what do I need to sharpen my game on? How can I do that? We pray this in all things in the name of your Son, who changed so much of our lives. Amen.